morning.
Morning.
I am Diana Christensen. I am not Ellen, obviously. And welcome to today's DORR meeting. It's about water. And I'm personally very excited about that. We've got two pictures of water to signify it. So grab a glass, make yourselves comfortable. And because I'm not Ellen, I have a list of notes, so bear with me. I want to do a report out on a couple of things and then we'll get right to it. One is that we had a neighborhood meeting in the BOC on the 14th, October 14th, Saturday. We had 19 people come, all of them interested in canvassing, interested in getting the petitions out. And so we are well on our way to start kick this election season off. If you're interested in the neighborhood program, which is designed to have us talking to one another, if you can imagine that, please see me, talk to Lama, her number's on the website. Feel free to call me as well, and we'll get you set up with a map and the script and the paperwork. Let's see. I'm next going to talk about the DORR fundraisers. We've got 10 parties going because we are an organization that likes to party. And we're doing it on 1 year out from the election. And so we're getting ready. We're getting ready to spend money, to raise money, spend money. Friday, November 3rd, Saturday, November 4th, and Sunday, November 5th. Can I get a show of hands who's already signed up in this room?
To attend or to have host?
To attend or to host if you're hosting.
Or to contribute.
Right on from you, yes. And so what I want to say is the spaces at some of the parties are going really quick, so sign up now. We'd love to get you to sign up for at least one of them. And if you're a really party animal, sign up for 2 or 3. And Heather Herman is here, and she's going to talk about the current election. Brief snippet. So, Heather.
Thank you very much. I know you're probably all familiar and got your ballot. There's only one item on the ballot. It's the budget override continuation for our Sedona School District. It is not an increase in taxes. It's just a continuation, thus the word continuation in the ballot name. It keeps our schools fully funded, and that budget override makes up 15% of our maintenance and operations budget at the Sedona School District. It's approximately $841,000. And those funds are used to pay for things like full day kindergarten, because Arizona doesn't fund full day kindergarten, pays for art, music, PE. I don't know if you've ever heard the amazing orchestra department up at the high school, but the kids are incredibly talented. And I'm here just to ask, if you haven't voted, to please just take the time to fill out that one little yes bubble and send your ballot back in. I have a couple of override signs if anyone needs one for their front yard, just to remind your friends and neighbors. And we're also doing an informative session at West Sedona School in the cafeteria on Wednesday evening at 5:30. Anyone is welcome. It is not sponsored by the school district because the school district is not allowed to talk about the override in terms of a yes or no vote. They can only say that there's an election on November 7th. And it's one ballot measure that impacts the district. So I'm here as an individual sponsoring it, supporting it, and paying for the space at the West Sedona School on behalf of the Booster Club, which is an independent nonprofit. And we're just trying to get the word out. We found that the disconnect mostly lies with people who don't have children or a connection to the schools, or understand that community schools make a community. So please tell your friends and neighbors. And if anyone has any questions, I'll leave some flyers here about the meeting on Wednesday, and anyone is welcome. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We're telling people you don't have to stay for an hour. You can come in, ask your questions, get the information you need. and then hit the door and go to dinner with your family. So if I can answer any questions right now, I will, but I'm guessing that we've got some supporters of education in the room. Yeah. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You still have it, boy.
No, I did my 4 years and I can do more not being on the board.
So again,
Yes.
we're voting yes on our ballots. And we're gonna move on with announcements. Do you all know that we have a candidate against Eli Crane?
Yes.
From Navajo Nation. What you might not know is he's gonna be one of the speakers at the DORR annual meeting, which is January 21st at St. Andrew's Church. Ellen got the jump on that. Let's move on to our speakers today. We're gonna be talking about water, and we have Sarah Porter with us on Zoom. Can we pull her up? And Sarah is the director, and I may botch the name, of the Kyl Center, for water policy at ASU. The Kyl Center promotes research, analysis, collaboration to build consensus around water stewardship. There is a site on the DORR website, or there's a link to the Arizona Water Blueprint. Check it out. It's going to be interesting. And there you are, Sarah. Hi. Welcome.
Good morning.
So I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning. It's really nice to be with you all. I'm going to see if I can tee up my shared screen for you and start the slideshow. Let's see if I can get this going. All right. Are you all seeing I need a verbal because I've lost video image of you. Are you seeing my slideshow?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You're not seeing presenter view. You're seeing the slide.
That's
Is that
fine.
right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We're seeing it
All
on
right,
Zoom
thank you.
also.
Well, I want to first thank you all for dedicating a beautiful Friday morning to a topic that a lot of people think is kind of a black box, and they want it to stay a black box. Actually, water is probably the most important and most interesting thing that an Arizonan can spend time learning about. But for some reason, a lot of people feel reluctant to. And I hope that if you have such feelings, and you probably don't because you're here, but if you do, I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll feel like you have a bit of a grounding, and you can go to our Arizona Water Blueprint and learn more. The Kyl Center for Water Policy, my little think tank, is part of a 42-year-old think tank, Morrison Institute for Public Policy. And we do our work in a neutral and nonpartisan manner. We focus on facts and data and a respect for the historical context in which water policy issues arise in order to help Arizonans have better discussions and make better decisions about water policy. And really appreciate the pitch for the Arizona Water Blueprint. Don't go there now because it's an absolute rabbit hole, but it is a great resource, kind of almost like a Wikipedia for Arizona water resources and policy. So what I'd like to do is cover a few basics about water, and I'm afraid they're going to be a little bit of Central Arizona focused because that's where so many Arizonans live. And so we're accounting for like 85% of the population if we stay focused a bit on Central Arizona. And then we'll talk about what's going right, then what are the challenges and what are the solutions. So a few basics, we'll start with this. As a state, there is more than one single source of supply. I think that's something that people in Sedona and Yavapai County are more aware of than other people. As a state, we have 4 primary sources of water: Colorado River water, other in-state rivers like the Verde and the Salt River. We have groundwater, that's water pumped up from the aquifers. And then we have reclaimed water, which used to be referred to as effluent, but we're trying to rebrand reclaimed water. One of these 4 supplies of water is not like the others, and that's groundwater. Groundwater, unlike these other supplies, has to be regarded as non-renewing in Arizona. That's because we don't get enough precipitation to replenish aquifers as fast as we typically withdraw groundwater. So a big management challenge in the state of Arizona is to acknowledge and manage groundwater as a non-renewable resource, while we have a reasonable expectation that while the amount of water we get from the other sources of supply may vary from year to year, we can reasonably expect that rivers will continue to flow and we will continue to produce effluent, now known as reclaimed water. Here's how the supply breaks in Phoenix. I'm showing you this to flag that in large urban areas, reclaimed water is a bigger and bigger proportion of the water portfolio because, of course, big cities produce a lot of effluent. And also that Phoenix has the benefit of the in-state surface water system, the Salt Verde system managed by SRP. And so that's a very significant source of supply for Greater Phoenix. Tucson doesn't have the benefit of a big in-state surface water supply. And so Tucson is much more reliant on imported water from the Colorado River than the Phoenix area is. Couple important points about water in Arizona. And I think if you learn these 2 things, it is so much easier to think about what's going on with water policy in the state. And the first is that water is a local matter. And by this, I mean that every water provider, whether it's a city like Flagstaff or a private water provider like Arizona Water Company or EPCOR or Global Water, each water provider is responsible for obtaining and managing its own water portfolio. And this means that the water challenges can vary pretty dramatically, even among cities that are adjacent to each other. And a quick example of this is that the city of Scottsdale is much more reliant on Colorado River water, pardon me, than the cities adjacent to it, than Phoenix or Tempe. And as a result, Scottsdale is out ahead, if you will, in pushing for people within Scottsdale to use less water. Scottsdale needs people to use less water. There's no judgment involved in this. This is just a fact that there can be this variation from city to city. And the other important point to keep in mind is that each of the sources of supply that you see in these beautiful little hexagons has its own legal regime governing it, its own framework. So in Arizona, we don't just have one kind of groundwater, we really have 2 kinds of groundwater. We have highly regulated groundwater in some parts of the state and virtually unregulated groundwater in other parts of the state. The laws around Colorado River water are quite different from the laws around in-state river water. And then I deliberately kept new imported supplies in italics and a special color to highlight that if and as we develop new supplies of water in Arizona, those new supplies will have their own unique rules around their use, their transfer, generally their governance. So if you remember those 2 things, it's very local, and that the first thing you need to ask about when you're thinking about water is, what's the source of supply? You'll be on your way to understanding what are the pressures, the challenges, and the solutions that are available. I'll talk very briefly about each of these sources of supply, those 4 sources that I highlighted. First, Colorado River. This is so much in the news these days. The important thing to keep in mind about the Colorado River is that Arizona, while the Colorado River runs along Arizona's western border, and a good amount of it is imported via the Central Arizona Project Canal, we share this water with 7 states, 29 tribes, and northern Mexico. So governing the Colorado River is a really big, unruly process, but because it, for the most part, requires the consensus of all of these people in this vast region. the water from the Colorado River is allocated to the 7 states and Mexico, according to a kind of a bunch of compacts, treaties, US Supreme Court cases, and federal legislation that we refer to as the law of the river, quite a vaunted, I think, nomenclature. But essentially it breaks this way. The famous Colorado River Compact of 1922 divided the Colorado River Basin into an upper and a lower basin, and it divided a theoretic volume of the Colorado River being 15 million acre feet. It divided that volume in half and said the lower basin gets 7.5 and the upper basin gets 7.5. That's all the Colorado Compact of 1922 did. But then in those later parts of the law of the river, the allocations to Arizona were established, California, and the other states. So I'm using this volumetric in acre foot. What is it? Well, an acre foot is roughly 326,000 gallons of water, and that's the amount of water to cover an acre of land 1 foot deep. Another way to think about an acre foot is that 3 to 4 fairly efficient single-family residences in Arizona will collectively use 1 acre foot of water per year. Another way to think of it is what an acre foot's all about, and that's agriculture. An acre of lettuce might use 2 acre feet per season. An acre of alfalfa could use 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 acre feet of water, depending on how much water the farmer had available to apply to it. So it gives you some idea of what we're talking about. I've already mentioned the Central Arizona Project Canal. In its time, it was the world's largest aqueduct conveying Colorado River water uphill 2,400 feet to Phoenix and Tucson. The service territory for the Central Arizona Project is the 3-county area of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties. Roughly 85% of Arizonans live in the CAP service area, but of course, not all the people who live in the CAP service area are using Colorado River water. Personally, I live in the SRP service area and I work in the SRP service area, so I have to travel out of the SRP service area to enjoy some of that Colorado River water. Now on to our big in-state system that serves so many people in the state of Arizona. You're probably more aware than most people in Phoenix that the watersheds for the SRP system are 8 million acres of beautiful forests and other lands in the north and eastern parts of the state. And that the water that created the right for the SRP system was, or I should say the rights were established for the lands in the Phoenix area that were then called the Salt River Valley back in at the turn of the 20th century. In 1910, the farmers living in the Phoenix area sought a legal decree of a right to the water that they had been using to farm their 280,000 or so acres. And they obtained a decree during pre-statehood called the Kent Decree. More on that perhaps in a bit. One of the things that's interesting about SRP water is that the cities that you see in this pop-up box, those are cities that have lands in the SRP water service territory. But with the exception of Tempe, most of these cities are not entirely within the SRP service territory. So here's a blow up from the Arizona Water Blueprint of the blue zone being the SRP water service area. And you can see that a lot of the growth areas for places in Phoenix, for example, North Scottsdale, North Phoenix, where TSMC is going in, these areas are not in SRP project lands. Now, this matters because, according to the Kent Decree and Arizona surface water law, water from the SRP system, from the original system, can only be delivered in the original project lands. Now, there's a kind of exception to this for new additions to the SRP system. For example, in the early 21st century, cities and SRP enlarged Roosevelt Dam, the big dam on the Salt River, and the water that's additionally in the dam because of the enlargement isn't constrained to these original project lands. But for the most part, SRP water, the vast amount of SRP water is constrained to these lands. Why am I dwelling on this for you? We'll get to this when we come to the adjudication. But for the most part, this constraint means that there isn't a big play for Phoenix area cities in getting much more water off the Salt and Verde system. That is not a very terribly productive strategy for them in terms of enlarging the water supply. Now we're on to groundwater. So we really, as I said before, we have two kinds of groundwater. Really, technically, we have three kinds of groundwater, but I don't want to overcomplicate this. What's important for you all is to know that in some parts of the state, groundwater is highly regulated. These are places called active management areas, AMAs. The green blobs on this map are the state's AMAs. And in these areas, we have essentially a cap and trade system for groundwater. Entities have allocations of groundwater. They can store additional water in the ground. They can keep their groundwater in the ground. And we have an accounting system for that groundwater managed by the State Department of Water Resources. We have rules that push growth to renewable water supplies. The signature part of those rules is the 100-year assured water supply requirement that does not allow new subdivisions of 6 or more lots unless the developer has proved a 100-year supply of water to serve that subdivision. And we have a prohibition on new irrigated agriculture as of the establishment of the AMA. In the case of Prescott, Phoenix, Pinal, Tucson, and Santa Cruz, that prohibition went into effect in 1980. And the agriculture, that means 2 or more acres of irrigated land, had to have been continuously farmed for the 5 years leading up to the establishment of the Groundwater Management Act. Douglas just became an ANA as of the election of 2022. So the prohibition on new irrigation of agriculture will date from then. Another aspect of the Groundwater Management Act is mandatory system-level conservation requirements imposed every 10 years and stepped up, made more rigorous every 10 years. By system level, I mean on municipal systems, agriculture, industry, whatever sector that you can think of, there are stepped up conservation requirements every 10 years. We have a lighter category of groundwater management in irrigation non-expansion areas. We have 3 of those in Arizona, the newest one being the Hualapai Valley INA. The regulations in these areas basically prohibit new irrigated agriculture as of the date of the INA's establishment, and also a requirement, as in the case of AMAs, that larger wells larger than small residential wells, must be metered, and their withdrawal, their pumpage, the amount of water that they're pumping out, must be reported to the state. So we have a degree of management in those INAs. And then outside of the AMAs and INAs, in the white areas of the state, there is no metering requirement. There is no limitation on the use of groundwater, except that with limited exceptions, groundwater can't be pumped out and transported to another basin. Without that limitation, I have very little doubt that quite a bit of the groundwater around the state would have been transported out for use in the Phoenix to Tucson area. And then we have a rule that groundwater must be put to beneficial use, which basically means you can't waste it. You probably are hearing stories, probably have read stories about, of course, it's been very much in the news lately about the Saudi dairy in La Paz County. It's kind of here, somewhere around here. That's in one of those parts of the state where there is virtually no regulation of groundwater. And more on that later. But essentially, what I want to underscore, is that can't happen everywhere. That can only happen in these non-regulated areas. So where does the water go? Just where is the demand going? Agriculture is still the largest using sector of water in Arizona. Not surprising, because it takes a lot of water to grow food and fiber. But I think it is surprising to people to know that with all the growth that Arizona has had in, Phoenix and Tucson and even Flagstaff, municipal demand only comprises 22% of the state's water demand. And then industrial demand is kind of a grab bag of users, but it's largely power generation, mines, and dairies. For some reason, dairies are thrown into the industrial demand category. How it breaks in Phoenix is that, of course, the Phoenix area being a large city, municipal demand is, half of the demand in the Phoenix active management area, but agriculture is still hanging in there, comprising 30% of the demand. The tribal demand category for Phoenix AMA is really because we have tribal homelands within the Phoenix active management area, and tribes aren't required to report a breakdown of their water use to the state. So the Department of Water Resources simply counts tribal water use, as one blob tribal. Most of that water use is probably agricultural. And again, it breaks very similarly for the Tucson AMA. Most of the demand is coming from cities. So what are the demand trends in Arizona? And I think this is probably going to be the most positive little portion of my presentation today. First, to say that in the high growth, Sun Corridor, CAP service area, Phoenix to Tucson, you can see, if we look here at this beautiful chart that I've created, municipal demand has been holding pretty steady. In fact, in this time period, a 20-year period, we had about a 45% population increase in the Phoenix to Tucson area, the CAP service area, and we had about a 14% increase in water demand. You can also see that agricultural demand has declined slightly. So we can say that in the in that Phoenix to Tucson area, also known as the Sun Corridor, what we're seeing is a decoupling of population growth and water demand. For the whole state, the story looks, I would say, even rosier, at least if you're looking as far back as the mid-50s, as the Department of Water Resources is in this graphic. This is a graphic that compares population growth, water demand, and growth in the economy as represented by gross domestic income. And the conclusion is water demand has gone down slightly since the mid-1950s. Population has grown over 550%, and the economy has exploded to almost 22 times what it was in the mid-50s. So this is a pretty optimistic story. It tells us that we can add a lot of people, we can add a lot of economic activity without necessarily increasing water demand. It really tells us that good management and, groundwater management probably being the most important, can, create a much more sustainable, if you will, water picture for us. Kind of the backstory of this chart is that the Groundwater Management Act did incentivize the conversion of a lot of agricultural lands in central Arizona to urban, particularly in the greater Phoenix area. And because agriculture, acre for acre, agriculture needs to use a lot more water than urban use typically. Remember, 6 to 10 acre feet of water for alfalfa versus, 1 acre foot for 4 single family homes. When agricultural land uses are converted to urban uses, typically there is a decline in water demand. But in every sector, and if you just think about your own home now versus your home of 20, if you're like me and you can remember, toilets, faucets, washing machines, and other things from the 70s or 80s, you know that everything has gotten much more efficient. So we're seeing a steady per capita demand of about 1 to 2%, even in residential water use. I could stop for a sec in case there are any questions, or I can just keep going right into what has Arizona got right. Are there any questions about what I've talked about so far?
Any questions? Kathy? So, under the non-AMA areas
Mhm.
where water must be put to quote beneficial use, how is beneficial use defined and who defines
Yeah.
it?
Well, it's defined in common law. There is not even a statute that explains it. So common law would mean sort of court cases and history. And it's really defined as not wasting it. So there's a fun water law scholar from the U of A, Robert Glennon, who likes to say you could have a catfish farm, you know, in La Paz County, totally, you know, watered with groundwater, and that would be considered a beneficial use. So, you know, you kind of open a Pandora's box if you start legislating what people can use their water for. And I think Arizona has, you know, tried to avoid opening that Pandora's box. And that would be true of other Western states as well.
We have another question, Holly?
What does it take to become an AMA?
Great questions. Great question. There are two ways. One way is to get petitions signed and then get it on the ballot, and that's what happened in Douglas. A little group of, you know, a little grassroots group got petitions signed, and the people, you know, the residents, the voters voted it in. The other way to become an AMA is for the Department of Water Resources to evaluate and conclude that creating an AMA is necessary to protect the groundwater resource for that particular basin. The department has interpreted the criteria that would lead to that conclusion, conservatively, meaning it has to get really bad. It would have to be very bad for the department to declare an AMA, and it has never happened.
And a follow-up, Holly?
Yeah, follow up. When you say get petitions signed to get on the ballot, is that at a city level, at a county level?
It would be the basin, I believe. It's and if you want to email me, I can point you to the particular statutes. It's very clear in the statutes. I'm pretty sure it's in the basin.
Thank you. I will do that.
I'm going to take one more, Mark.
Yeah, how much of our water is lost due to waste? And by waste, I mean waste in the pumping systems, piping systems,
Mhm.
evaporation, and any other
Yeah,
cause for waste.
That's a great question. Of course, it depends on, you know, which system you're looking at. Within the AMAs, there's a requirement that systems keep that's called system loss, the water loss through pumps and pipes. It has to be below 10%. And because, you know, there are places all over the state, but particularly in the Phoenix to Tucson area, where the systems are pretty new, and in that system loss figure is pretty low. Evaporation is a different thing. We don't have a lot of control over that. The evaporation off Lake Mead arguably is water lost, and it's very significant. It's something like 1 million acre feet per year. So it just depends on which system you're looking at. Outside of AMAs, the system losses tend to be much, much higher. And the older the system, you can pretty much count on higher losses, often 20 to 30%. There is work in the state on doing something about that, but it's very good question, because, you know, we probably should be looking at repairing those systems, recapitalizing, reinvesting as the first and cheapest new supply of water. So,
Okay, Sarah.
yes.
Thanks. Go ahead.
One more question, or should I go ahead?
Okay, one more, last one.
I did have a question. I noticed your chart on water usage only went up to 2019.
Yeah,
And I would think that a lot of the growth, and certainly in the Phoenix Scottsdale area, has been even since then.
I'm not sure. It could be. The problem is that the reporting that the department relies on lags, there's a time lag. So I'm still waiting for them to update past 2019. There's a great, the Department of Water Resources has a great website that has an enormous amount of data within the active management areas where there's all the reporting requirements. And so the data for this are from largely, a lot of the data here are from the AMA data that the department manages. So what has Arizona got right? Well, one big thing, and it's important even to people outside of the SRP project lands, is the Salt River project. This is a manageable, just I think by luck, it's a very manageable system. It has a locally elected board. It doesn't operate by consensus of 40 million people. It operates by a locally elected board who has the capacity to reduce allocations if there's a shortage. And the other thing that's been helpful is that since 1980, total water demand within the SRP service area has declined 30%. That's mostly because of urbanization on top of ag lands. And the system is proving to be less susceptible to climate change than the much vaster Colorado system for hydrologic reasons and geography. Another thing that Arizona's got right is the Assured Water Supply Designation Program. This is a program that applies only within the AMAs, but it's a program that gives a city or a private water provider the ability to prove that it has 100 years, it has a supply of water to serve current and projected demand for 100 years. This proof, going through this proof, is at intervals of no less frequent than, or no more, taking no more longer time than every 15 years. So this means that all of the cities in the gray areas that you see are going through this exercise of proving that they have 100 years supply of water for their current demand and for the growth that they expect in the designation period. It's a very, I would say, we could say that it's a gold standard of municipal water supply planning. Another thing that Arizona is out at the forefront with is water banking. Arizona has really innovated ways of recharging aquifers. Perhaps you have flown over some of these weird polygons and wondered what they are. Very likely they are a water recharge project where the water is poured on, and these are sites that are specially selected to have the right hydrologic conditions for the water to percolate back down into the aquifers. To this point, Arizona has banked over 13 million acre feet of water. The whole state uses about 7 million acre feet per year. So having banked 2 years worth of the entire state demand is really impressive. I should mention that water banking really makes sense because of the accounting for groundwater, the guarantee that an entity has, that when an entity stores groundwater, it will be there for them because groundwater is managed under the Active Management Act with this kind of cap and trade system. Another thing that Arizona's out in the lead with is water reuse. 93% of the water that enters the wastewater treatment system is reclaimed and reused. It's reused for lots of things, for cooling the Palo Verde nuclear power plant. It's reused for recharging aquifers. Tucson and Scottsdale have developed partnerships with golf resorts to deliver reclaimed water for watering golf courses, and those cities would say that those golf resorts import lots of tourist dollars, creating jobs and tax revenue for the cities. And then some cities, and this is an example of Tucson's heritage site, are recharging riverbeds with reclaimed water, thereby also recreating riparian habitat. So Arizona has can pat itself on the back. And the water reuse is happening beyond the AMAs. We see reuse happening all over the state as municipal water providers see the value in doing something with their effluent other than simply disposing of it. So those are what's going well. Now let's talk about the challenges. I particularly wanted to talk with you about the challenge of the general stream adjudications, because this is a challenge that touches you all personally as water users in the Verde watershed. In Arizona, we have this doctrine for regulating surface water rights. That would be rights to water from in-state, not the Colorado River, but in-state rivers and streams, called the doctrine of prior appropriation. And it works in this way. The first person to come along and divert water from a river or a stream and put it to a beneficial use, like a farm or a mine or a municipal water system, has a right to their water in a time of shortage before the next user, before a more junior user, as we say in legal parlance. So this is a beautiful system, and I would say that it's a program of economic security, because it means you know what risk you're taking, because you know where you are in priority. I mean, theoretically, it makes a lot of sense in a place where there is a risk of water scarcity, but it also requires that someone catalog all of the users, how much water they're entitled to, what use they make of it, and where they use it, because all of those attributes impact other water users if they change. And we didn't, even though we adopted prior appropriation, it was the common law rule in Arizona before statehood, and in 1919 it was codified in Arizona state statutes. We never actually did that cataloging until the 70s, when the adjudications were commenced. And by that point, there were enormous numbers, thousands of water users making a multiple of that many uses of the water. So the adjudication is a judicial proceeding to do the cataloging, to figure out every single claim of right to every single river and tributary within a watershed, and finally adjudicate it, meaning having a judicial process that finalizes those rights. In the case of the Gila watershed, and of course the Verde is a tributary of the Gila River, which used to be a flowing river across Arizona, there are over 42,000 individual claimants and almost 90,000 claims of use for all of the rivers and streams within the Gila watershed. It's important, this adjudication, it seems like it's taking forever, but actually a great deal of foundational work. What could be more important than the laws around the use of water in Arizona, the allocation of water. And so we had years and years of litigation over, important foundational issues. And most of those are finished. The court has been going very hard at the first watershed that was addressed in the adjudication. That was the San Pedro. The court is very far along in the San Pedro. At the same time, also litigating sub watersheds in the Little Colorado watershed. And now the court has turned to the Verde watershed. The court has ordered the Department of Water Resources to complete what is called a hydrographic survey report. The department has completed this is a little bit of cart before the horse. Let's just say that it's moving along. It's actively being litigated. I also want to note that the adjudications are where many of the tribal water claims need to be resolved, because we have a federal law called the McCarran Amendment that says that tribes need to assert their claims in these state court adjudications. In the Verde watershed, one of the tribal water rights that's being litigated is the rights asserted by the Yavapai Apache Nation. And of course, the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe have claims that are being litigated in the Little Colorado adjudication. In Arizona, of our 22 tribal nations, 15 tribes have fully or partially resolved their claims or adjudicated their rights, and we still have 9 tribes that have not had their rights resolved. So the biggest reason I think it's fair to say that the adjudication is taking so long, and this matters a lot in the Verde watershed, is this issue around subflow. Subflow, I'm sorry about the typo there. That should say underground. Subflow is water that is withdrawn from underground, and yet it's near a river or stream and would otherwise enter the stream bed. It would be part of the riverbed or stream bed. And this became a big issue in the adjudication, partly because, as water experts in Arizona like to say, if you want to know where the rivers are, look for the wells. I'll show you a graphic in a minute that really proves that point. So there was a lot of litigation about should wells that are near rivers and streams in the adjudication be pulled in to the adjudication? Are those wells really withdrawing river water or stream, creek water, or are they withdrawing groundwater? Groundwater is, as we already discussed, not subject to the law of prior appropriation. Outside of the AMAs and INAs, if you own the land, you can drill a well and use all the water you want, just don't waste it or transport it. So after a lot of litigation, the court concluded that yes, water that would otherwise reach the stream bed is water that's subject to the adjudication. And they gave this great hydrologic definition that that's water that's in the saturated floodplain Holocene alluvium, meaning the sort of a layer, the Holocene layer that is under rivers and streams. And they told the Department of Water Resources, which is the technical expert in the adjudications, that the department needed to delineate the subflow zones of all of the rivers and streams in the adjudication. And that's what's gone on lately in the Verde since 2017. The Department of Water Resources has completed the delineation of the subflow zone of the Verde and the Sycamore Canyon watersheds, and more recently of the other tributaries of the Verde there. And now we're in the process of objections, a motion for summary judgment, kind of fighting out the final delineation. One of the things that makes the subflow rule complicated is that when a lot of wells are together, they typically out here where we don't have that much water in our aquifers and it takes such a long time to replenish them, wells form a cone of depression where eventually wells are sucking water out that would otherwise reach riverbeds or stream beds. And the court in the adjudication has said that wells that are in this cone of depression, even if they're not in the subflow zone, those wells also need to be in the adjudication. This means that those wells in the subflow zone and in the cone of depression, the water right that needs to be established is a surface water right. In other words, first in time, first in use. And most of those wells will have very junior priority because most of those wells were drilled much later, long after all of the water was essentially allocated out of the rivers and streams. The court has made this exception, and that is de minimis wells that are pumping so little that it's not worth the court's time to bother with, are not included in the adjudication. There's still a lack of clarity over what exactly a de minimis well is. But meanwhile, I wanted to show you what I mean about if you want to find the rivers, look for the wells. So we can look here on the development of wells over time in the Verde Basin. In 1919, when Arizona established the surface water code, the rules about how to officially appropriate water from a river, there were 72 wells in the Verde Basin. In 1974, when the adjudication commenced, there were 2,300 wells. See how those wells very much track where the rivers and streams are? That's because drilling a well on the top of a mountain or in some of these other places wouldn't be very productive. In 1987, when the subflow issue was first raised, the number of wells had tripled from the time that the adjudication had commenced. There were about 7,500 wells. In 2000, when the Arizona Supreme Court established the subflow rule, there were 13,000 wells in the Verde Basin. And in 2017, when I developed this graphic, there, the number was pushing 18,000. The vast majority of these wells will be found to be withdrawing at least some amount of subflow, and they will also be found to be very junior in priority because they're all really new. They're all, some of the most recent users. I also believe that the vast majority of these wells will be determined to be de minimis and let out of the adjudication, but you can see the legal complexity of this situation. So that's the adjudication, and I'm glad that I put that first. I'm going to run through the other challenges. I think you're all probably aware, because you're self-selected to be aware of the problem of declining flows in the Colorado River, and particularly declining levels in the two big reservoirs that hold water for the lower basin. That would be Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And this graphic from the Bureau of Reclamation shows you what the risks are that we're facing. By the way, the elevation has gone up a little bit since this graphic was created because we had a really good winter. But essentially, if the levels go down, we can see they can get down to a level where no hydropower could be produced in either of the reservoirs. And a little bit below that level is the point at which water cannot be delivered off the reservoir. I guess it's not a reminder. Lake Mead is shaped like an inverted cone, or kind of like an ice cream cone. And so the lower you get, the faster with each withdrawal, the faster the lake levels go down. So there have been negotiations since the early 2000s. It's very difficult because the only solution to protect Lake Mead or Lake Powell from getting to dead pool or no hydropower production is to leave water in Lake Mead. And the way the argument breaks is that agriculture, which uses most of the water, also has the most senior rights. So it makes it very difficult to get to a place where the sector that has the capacity to do the most conservation is ready to do it. To add, to the complexity, Arizona agreed for CAP water users to take junior priority, meaning that Phoenix and Tucson areas would, if cuts get deep enough, they will experience cuts before farmers in Yuma, farmers in Imperial Valley. So negotiations are ongoing. It's hopeful. I think I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time, except to say that an important point is, while the total amount in a non-shortage year of water that would be delivered by the Central Arizona Project is 1.6 million acre feet. But the total amount of water that cities need to meet demand at the tap is closer to 500,000, between 500,000 and 600,000 acre feet, which is to say that cities could, I'm going to skip through this, cities can sustain additional significant cuts even beyond what we've already seen before there's a disruption in their ability to meet demand at tap. I think I skipped through. All right, next big challenge is groundwater. We've kind of covered this. In a nutshell, the issue is that there are places in Arizona where what we're really seeing is the influx, typically, of industrial scale agriculture, drilling deep wells. I was looking at this with one of my team members yesterday, and we're seeing wells that are 1,500 feet deep that can pump 600 gallons per minute. These are really big, powerful wells. And that new demand is having an impact on the water supplies that some communities have been relying on. And very often there are people with much shallower wells, maybe 100-foot well, and they're finding that their wells are going dry. in the news that we hear about so much is a Saudi dairy over here in La Paz County. The same thing is happening over in Wilcox with a dairy from Minnesota. To me, and I know that there are arguments about this, but to me, the provenance of the big new ag user would not matter if my well went dry. And I don't care who it is that's depleting the aquifer. To me, the issue is that there's vulnerability in those communities. I think it's kind of a shame if an aquifer is completely depleted. Once an aquifer is depleted, it typically collapses and is no longer capable of storing water. And in these rural areas, there probably isn't another water solution out there. There's very little possibility that there will be a pipeline or some other big expensive water infrastructure to relieve that water challenge. So we have a lot of really vulnerable rural areas. You can go to the Kyl Center's Arizona Water Blueprint and take a look at our groundwater change app. And this is a screenshot from it. Anything pink or red, it shows you a basin that is experiencing a 20-year rate of decline of I think it's 3 feet or more. Another challenge, and I know we're wrapping it up, is water for growth. Basically, the Department of Water Resources, backed up by Governor Hobbs, has recognized that groundwater in both the Phoenix AMA and the Pinal AMA is fully spoken for by grandfathered agriculture, by industrial unreplenished pumping that's allowed to pump as an exception. And so now there's a big urgency among some people for water supplies for the future. Should I stop here or should I just wrap it up?
Wrap it up, that'd be great.
Okay, good. I've already talked about how almost 95% of water used indoors can be reclaimed. So for some cities, reducing the amount of water used outdoors, upcycling water that's reclaimed will be a huge solution. The city of Phoenix is developing what they call advanced water purification, where reclaimed water is treated up to potable, and that will reduce Phoenix's reliance on the Colorado River by 50%. So reuse is the first and best solution. The state has invested in new funds for fixing leaky old systems in rural areas, water conservation grants, water supply development in rural areas, and water supply development in the CAP service areas. And I will just show you the list of concepts that are in some stage of development. The CRIT lease and the Roosevelt Dam storage modification will not require additional infrastructure. There are other ideas out there that will require additional infrastructure. And I'll just go to my big conclusion. Essentially, I think big cities in Arizona will be able to adapt. Groundwater dependent rural areas really have a big challenge ahead of them. And what I hope that you will do is go to the Arizona Water Blueprint and sign up for updates, because then you will get notices of our monthly office hours where we have a Zoom meeting like this, and you're invited to just come on and see what we use the blueprint for, and ask your questions about water. But if you want anything more concrete, I'm going to back up and leave you with these challenges. Engage with your water provider, speak with your elected representatives, help elevate water to the top issue that it should be in our state. That's all I have.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah, we have a question on Zoom.
We have a couple of questions, but before we go to it, I want to say that Yavapai County Board of Supervisors member Donna Michaels is here, and she's going to be talking about her conversations about water with the governor as well. So sit tight. Questions for Sarah?
Okay, I've got two on Zoom from Irwin. First one is, it could be argued that growing thirsty crops in a desert is not beneficial use. What's the legal definition of beneficial use with respect to adjudication?
So as I mentioned, there isn't a definition of beneficial use beyond not wasting it. So if you're using the water for something like growing a crop or extracting an ore from the ground, that's beneficial. The law doesn't look at the efficiency of use or make a value judgment about, this or that crop.
Okay, thank you. And Erwin asks another question. Does agriculture / industry pay full market rates for the water they consume, or is the cost subsidized? And then clarification, question is in regard to the Colorado River water specifically.
If we're only talking about the Colorado River water, the cost that a user pays typically relates to the cost for transporting that water. So CAP water users pay more than main stem water users. Whether this would be regarded as subsidized or not, is kind of it's actually kind of a complicated question. Historically, farmers in the CAP service area decided that they couldn't afford the water from the CAP, and they were going to go back to their grandfathered groundwater rights. And so the cities and the federal government reached a deal with the farmers to subsidize CAP water that was being sent to agriculture so that that water would be used, helping to keep aquifers intact. The cost that a farmer pays for water really depends on what is the water, what is the infrastructure that's delivering that water. It's quite variable.
Thank you. And just one other thing, if you could add your contact information in the chat.
Sure,
That would be
I will
great.
include that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from the floor, Mayor Scott Jabbo.
Sarah, thank you for this very informative presentation. Even I was able to understand it, so I appreciate it. Some of our constituents are concerned, those that live near the Verde River or Oak Creek. I've been told that through the mitigation that there's possibility that someone's gonna come in and cut down all the trees that are aligning or along the edge of the creek. Even though it's on their property, because trees that are invasive are just using up water needlessly. Can you opine on that at all?
Yeah, I think that is a concern that is rooted in a strategy that SRP undertook decades ago. And I think SRP immediately regretted it. But decades ago, SRP, this is a totally different SRP than the SRP that you may be acquainted with now in the, Lucas Shaw and, other people. Essentially, that was done. It's a very different time. I don't think SRP has I think even SRP understands it doesn't have the right to go clear trees off of someone else's land. That idea, it really isn't a remedy in the adjudication. It would, you could certainly, it's not a remedy. As the adjudication develops, there will be negotiations among parties, the larger water using parties. And this would include the Yavapai Apache Nation. It includes the cities that use SRP water and SRP itself and other water users, Freeport McMoran, other entities, the cities of the Verde Valley, water companies, big ranches. And there will be negotiations around what are the water uses that we should just forget about. We should let it go. And then what are the places where we need some kind of agreement? But the idea, the strategy of someone coming in and chopping down trees or bulldozing, it really isn't. It's just not. It's not authorized in the adjudication. And I don't think there's any possibility of that really being something that anyone pursues.
Thank you very much. It didn't make any sense to me either, but it still was a legitimate question that somebody had asked me.
It is legitimate. And the other thing that, I think we're coming to understand, we used not to understand, we collectively, that when you remove the vegetation alongside a stream, there isn't necessarily a water savings. Other vegetation grows back. You might even create a context for higher water using undesirable invasive species, like, of course, tamarisk. And so there, you know, there's a much better understanding. I mean, SRP has fantastic conservation biologists on its staff, for example, and of course you have, you know, the Forest Service and others that have an interest in, you know, approaching habitat carefully.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ready to move on?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me share. I really appreciate it.
Hey, we have Supervisor Donna Michaels here. Thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
And we'd love to hear from you.
Guys need a break first?
No.
She had a tight schedule.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. This is a wonderful baseline of information.
Just step back a few steps.
Okay.
We're gonna
So
try
you'll
and
be
get
on
you
the-
on the Zoom.
I can't wait.
Turn around, you'll see.
Have a seat in one chair.
There you go. It's better.
They had
Yeah,
half
that's
your
like
head.
grab this side of me, my spectacles. So you don't want me sitting down or you do?
You can, or you can stand.
I might do both before it's over. It's really good news to have the context for the next piece of information. Many of you know that we've been battling for some time in the legislature to have what is 44 areas deemed rural, identified as rural areas in our state. That is, those that are not part of the AMA, left basically to fend for themselves for water. And that's been going on for quite some time, since 1980. And so we have AMAs, INAs, and then nothing else. And what we're discovering or have known for some time in rural areas is that we need to have a local voice. And you heard that there are folks who make decisions about water use for CAP, but you don't hear that there are any entities or purviews where we locally can have a voice about how we use our water. And so to that end, in a bipartisan approach, we have several supervisors, of which I am one, who are busy working very hard to get the governor to whatever the legislature does this session, which under the leadership of Gail Griffin, many of you know, who has really caused the lock on being able to move forward any legislation that would be protective or supportive of rural local control, has tied up the legislature to this point. And to that end, the other supervisors such as Mojave County, Travis Lingenfelder, so we're making it very nonpartisan, and folks from La Paz, Pinal, and you saw some of the impact, for example, that Pinal is experiencing with their in La Paz with their basins being depleted and no say in it whatsoever. And we're there also in Yavapai County, mostly because the Board of Supervisors has not been granted that purview. And so what we're asking the governor and have been asking the governor, whoever the governor is this time around is Katie Hobbs, is to please exercise their executive power and ensure that our 44 areas, if they so choose, it's permissive, if they so choose, have their counties, all 15 counties, exercise authority and decision-making on applications that come before them on that include water interest. And so that could be a very variable process without specific language that says you have to do a certain thing in La Paz County that is also replicated in Yavapai County. And that notion is really coming of age now. So, the governor invited us, back in September, wasn't it? To come and talk to her. And, so we did. And so I have just a little PowerPoint because so many people have a hard time sometimes getting in to see her about, I don't know, water. And so this is a kind of a first of a bipartisan, not kind of a first, it is a first, a bipartisan attempt to go in and chat with the governor about not only their personal stories within the county, but why it's so important that if in fact, again, she who will be unnamed blocks the legislation to help us have a rule say in our water matters and considerations, she will exercise her executive powers and override it. And that was our day to do that. We'll stand now if they may. This is Patrice Horseman. Many of you know her, supervisor of Coconino County. And to the right of this table with the governor sitting at the head are her policy advisors for the most part. These people have been working for years. They don't look like it. They're so young. I was struck by that. On how to move it forward in a way that will get through the partisan politics that we're all experiencing now. And so Patrice Horseman, of course, of Coconino County, I think there were 4 of us, and Yavapai was one. And it's good to know that sign a proclamation urging our governor to please recognize that we need water security in rural Arizona. And that's the language that we came upon. How do we get support for water security? And that's really what we're aiming for, right? So let's move on to the next slide. Then we have, this is Travis Lingerfeld from Mojave. You may be reading his op-eds. So anybody in the room read some of his op-eds in answer to Gail Griffin's blocking this legislation? I think we have some. Yeah, so take a look at the op-eds that he has written. They're powerful, surprisingly so, by the way. Then we have Holly Irwin from, I think that's La Paz, is that right? And of course, again, La Paz was mentioned in the presentation with the basins being so depleted and really no control over. And if their board of supervisors could exercise control over that, that would have never happened. And I can't quite see who that other person is. Florinda, yeah, and she's from Tucson, that's right. Again, same kind of issues. Let's move to the next slide. I think I can give you a better picture. Yeah. Then the folks down at the end of the table, with the exception of Phil Good, many of you know that he was re-elected basically, or elected first time around because of his work with the Dells, Canadian Dells. So she invited him as well. And this was by invitation of the governor. And one of the things that the governor asked us to do is to come to her with our personal stories about representing, our county. And so each of us did that. And I think the next one may show that. No, next one. I took her a pie. And the reason I took her a pie. That's a crime. Well, sure. And the pie is representing that, as you saw on the screen, that Sarah presented, up to 72% of our water is agriculture. If we don't do something in a local way to protect it and to preserve it, and to really follow suit with what some of our farmers and ranchers are already doing, which is they're moving to regenerative practices as we speak. I'd love to talk to you more about that because I'm working toward a project on that very thing here in the Verde Valley. That what we need now, because many of our ranchers, many of our farmers who understood that that was a big draw on the water have moved away from high water crops to lower water crops. And now what we need is her leadership to prevent, yet again, a stalemate and ultimately no decision made once again about our 44 rural areas in this state, and allow us to assure us to have, as all the proclamations requested, water security in rural Arizona. And so this was the opportunity to go and talk to her about that. And she liked the pie. So if there's any questions about it, we're moving as fast as we've ever moved now, as in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way to say, look, it's well past time to recognize that rural Arizona should be on the chart and not just be the great state, if you'll forgive me of that expression once again, of Maricopa County and what's happening there and the density that's happening there. And despite the fact that there's a return, as you've heard from Sarah, I don't want us to become LA, where part of the density challenge that would be for us. They're drinking almost 100% of reclaimed water. 100%. I would like to know that my water is good water and not reclaimed and repurposed. And so I think that that's the challenge that we do have in rural Arizona, even though the data looks good when you look at it on the surface. The fact of the matter is that we are challenged to protect our water in rural Arizona because no one's looking out for us up here except us. And so that was the purpose of these rural board of supervisors, in one case, a mayor, to go and plead the case that whether it's an AMA and there's issues with those, that we need certainly in our rural areas to have a voice and be able to make our own decisions about how we want to see water used and based on good science. A lot of folks talk about hydrology. You can't really do anything because we don't know enough about the draw. And you heard a pretty rosy picture here with the presentation from the Morrison Institute. And by the way, I love the Morrison Institute. About 10 years ago, Scott, I think you were at that one. The Educational Forum, it's got to be 10 or 12 years ago. We used the white paper from the Morrison group on how to educate in rural areas to get into workforce development that was going to provide an economic underpinning for rural areas in Arizona. So the Morrison Institute gives good data, but it's a baseline. And what we're saying is we need to be able to apply the baseline as decision makers and elected officials. And so to that end, I hope you will encourage everyone to get behind the idea that we need to have legislation passed by Governor Hobbs. She was very receptive. We wouldn't have been there if she hadn't invited us. And we're cautiously optimistic. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm very hopeful that she will in fact override if it's met with an impasse, this legislative session.
I think we have a few questions.
Sure.
So let's go to Kathy.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear on, thank you for advocating. I'm trying to understand, you said you're working hard to get Katie to exercise her power to give the county authority. And I wanted to know, how would the county have that authority? Do you see that as a new department being developed at the county level? Or do you see that as something that would go then to planning and zoning, or something directly to the board? And then where would you get the expertise in any of those scenarios?
Yeah, we would expect it to go to the Board of Supervisors. But that's down the road. What we're saying is the first thing that has to be recognized, Kathy, is that rural Arizona counts, and that we need assurance that we're going to have water security in our 44 rural areas in this state. Right now, the conversation is about, yes, having the Board of Supervisors, and absolutely, just like you use Arizona Department of Water Resources expertise, there would be a body that would provide that information to make informed decisions.
Supervisor, I'm gonna get you to back up a little bit towards the
Left
chairs.
the picture again.
Yeah, you're not in the picture. Hold on. Sue Gold.
Hi Donna, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Sue. Good to
I
see
know
you.
that you are a proponent of ranching,
Yes,
increasing ranching. And
about increasing it. I'm a proponent of saving it.
well, I am too.
Yeah.
So you're saying that your position is not that you want to increase the number of ranching.
No.
I misunderstood that.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's lots of interpretations. And so thank you for the opportunity for me to be here, Sue, to clarify that. We have one of our 5 Cs, of course, that underpin this state as cattle and cattle ranching. And what I'm referring to is the OHV decimation of their grazing allotments. And be clear, Scott, you've been on enough tours with looking at what's happening out on our ranching grazing allotments specifically. They can't even get their cattle there now because of the OHV damage, because of the wildlife corridor being interrupted, because the Forest Service is not working in partnership, although with this most recent and precedent-setting MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, so that there's an agreement on how decisions will be made and specific metrics to determine what is a reasonable grazing allotment for each rancher. But we want our small, especially ranchers, to survive here and thrive. The case that I cite mostly is Andy Grosetta, who for now 100 years, that's a long time to be in a ranching family, has preserved that industry for his family. And you don't do that by running the land. You do it by being an expert on range management. He works very closely with the University of Arizona. In fact, all of our ranchers up here, by the way, do. And so there is a legend, you know, that they were the ones that damaged, and did indeed in the good old days, they did. But that's not true today. They use a great deal of, in fact, all evidence, science-based metrics to determine where's the best place for an allotment and how many head, and how can the rancher help in addition to that specific ranching industry to also work in wildfire management. And so grazing the tender that the grasses do become when we hit and go out of monsoon is an important part of good wildfire management as well. And so they get a bad rap, and there hasn't been a voice for them, particularly the ones that are here that have been here for a very long time.
So we need to wrap up, but I'm gonna have another question over here, and then I'm gonna check in with the.
I may make one more comment and I forgot. I want to add to it. For the first time in the history of this state, we finally got, after a year and a half of begging, and I have the stars on my knees to prove it, the United States Forest Service chief, Randy Moore, got out of Washington, D.C. and finally came here and walked these lands and saw the damage being done to our wonderful ranchers who have been terrific stewards of our public lands. And hopefully, he was appalled. He said, this information from my underlings in the Forest Service has never reached me. I did not know of this damage. And so for the first time in the history of this state, we hope to have a reasonable conversation where we can begin to affect policy from the top and behavior from local up.
Okay, quickly. Hi, Donna.
Sorry.
So what's your opinion on metering the wells of big water users? 72% is industry and farming and ranching, right? So the small guy that has a well it's not going to do a lot to meter their well, but if we meter the wells of the big ranches that use huge amounts of water and don't pay for it because it's either ditch rights or out of their well, then they wouldn't waste any because they have to pay for it now. So
There's all kinds of conversation about that, and that's a many faceted diamond of conversation. So to give a yes or no, I think would undermine really the complexity of that question you just asked. I don't have the answer because we don't have, in my opinion, the hydrology yet to help guide us, but we're getting there. I will say this, just personally. I don't care much for other countries or states that have already their water policy well in place. And the Saudis are not allowed to grow alfalfa there, but they are allowed to come here. And it's not about not loving diversity. It's about, I'd like our water to be for Arizona and to make sure that rural Arizona has water security before we look at how we can help others. And there's where the authority or purview of a board of supervisors could and should and would have absolutely intervened and prevented that from happening. So that's one way rather than metering it. If you're proactive and look at a corporation that's whether it's, what is it down in is it Pinellas, so many of the trees, and it happens to be a political figure in California, actually, that because they are so controlled, can't get the water he needs, so he comes over here and he buys the land, and that water is used for the crops that he exports out. And those are the issues that a board of supervisor could look at. And we would have the purview then, just like we do now with applications that are about a particular development. You know, in that process, you have a community gathering and you have community input. And people would say, we don't really want that kind of water use here. And we would listen to that. And so I think there are many strategies. I don't know about metering yet. I think it's going to happen. My worry is that it happens to the individual rather than the huge user. I want to be careful of that.
Excuse me. Shelley, do you have any more?
No questions from Zoom.
Okay. I have a final question. I'm going to take the purview. I'm concerned about creating a board that's through the Board of Supervisors that is predominantly Republicans. And who have had a history of non-regulation. And I'm wondering.
I think that's our biggest challenge to get the legislation through. You're absolutely right. Hopefully, we'll be able to bypass that partisan hold on, oh, government overreach mentality. We don't need anybody telling us how to use the water. To look, we all have skin in this game. And it's why I'm very pleased to say at this point, this journey that we're on and we're going to be on for a while, we have Republicans joining with us. But yes, I certainly wouldn't want a partisan impact on a decision that's about our quality of life. I don't care who they are.
Thank you. I care who they are.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank everybody for coming to our meeting. Our next DORR educational breakfast will be on November 17th, where we'll be talking about the popular vote compact and the rules for the electoral college. So hope to see you then. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.